What is up, warriors, and welcome back to another video, and welcome back to the time of year that I hate most in the fitness industry, and that is New Year, when everyone's talking about fat loss and all of these quick fixes. And really, there's just so much spam BS out there that just tries to grab people's attention, who are often in cases desperate to make a change. And unfortunately, a lot of the information out there does not provide the change that these people are after. So I wanted to create today a nice BS-free 5 mistakes or 5 don'ts that you want to think about when it comes to fat loss, improving body composition, weight loss, and just working towards your fitness as a long-term goal, because ultimately that is what it is. Fitness, training, eating right, all of these sort of things, this is a long-term investment. This is something that you have to show up for week in, week out, pretty much for the rest of your life. It's just something that you accept you're gonna have to do if you want to be healthy and robust until old age. But don't let that long-term perspective stop you from starting. Hopefully today, as I said, I've got some tips, and they are much more than just be in a caloric deficit and do some exercise, because everyone knows this. This is a fundamental of weight loss. But despite everyone knowing this, we have, record levels of obesity and people struggling. And that's because the advice is just a bit useless. Yes, factually, you're right. Caloric deficit, exercise equals fat loss. But actually the application they're doing is a little bit more nuanced than just that statement. So let's start with point number 1. So the first don't is don't waste time with cardio. The standard go-to when people are trying to lose some weight is they jump on a treadmill, they jump on an elliptical or cycle for 30 minutes, 50 minutes, whatever it is. It's a waste of both your time and energy when it comes to effectiveness for fat loss focus. Just because it burns calories does not mean it is good. Ultimately, most people end up in this black hole training, this kind of 30 to 60 minute period of doing some steady state cardio, which is not hard enough or short enough to kind of work that higher end, and it's not long or low enough to work the lower end. It's just kind of this black hole in between that doesn't really do much good, apart from stress you out. One of the most important things that it doesn't do is it doesn't support lean muscle mass. Having more muscle mass is one of the easiest ways to stay leaner long-term and consistently without that much more work. And it does this through various reasons, but let's stick to the caloric model for the moment. Ultimately, it raises your metabolic rate, meaning you need more calories to sustain your human with more muscle mass per day. So what do we want? Well, we don't want cardio. We do want resistance training. Now this could be weight training, or in my personal preference is body weight training. Specifically, we want to go heavy-ish. We want to be kind of that 65 to 85% of our 1 rep max, so we can kind of push ourselves here, go heavy, keep the rest period shorter, 10 to 60 seconds or so of rest, sometimes more between rounds. Think of it as sort of that traditional Metcon style metabolic conditioning this is. By the way, speaking of which, if you want these sort of programs, I have a fat loss program in my app Tribe, which is completely free. By the way, I made it free earlier this year, as well as the at-home program, both of which were supposed to help out with people who are struggling with weight loss. Just generally, we have a bit of a health epidemic, and also those stuck at home because of the whole virus thing. So either of those, both programs are completely free, all of the levels, all of the access, all of the sort of stuff that you'd usually get as a member. I'll link to them in the description down below. The reason resistance training done with shortened rest periods is beneficial is because this type of training is more towards that glycolytic pathway as opposed to the aerobic cardio option. One way this is superior for fat loss is that the high blood lactate levels decrease blood pH, and that sends a signal to increase growth hormone production. And it also raises testosterone, which again feeds back into our helping support lean muscle mass, which is going to be further supported by the fact that we're doing resistance training, which helps to build lean muscle mass. If you do get that urge to do some cardio, what I would recommend, instead of popping on and doing something steady for 30 to 50 minutes, try doing some sprints. This can be done on a bike, or it can just be done out in a field somewhere. Sprints work in a similar way to the resistance training in terms of they're going to help improve muscle mass, they're going to help with some insulin sensitivity, but it also helps raise catecholamine hormones such as epinephrine, which helps improve metabolic rate. Again, making that requirement of calories higher, make it easier to stay leaner. And also, if you do sprint training, you get much the same benefits as a lot of your traditional medium intensity continuous training, but it probably takes you about 1/5 of the time investment, which you can spend doing other things that you might want to do. If you want some examples of sprint training, I would suggest just search it up on Google. There'll be plenty of information out there. All right, so that's exercise out of the way. To be honest, exercise is the kind of more straightforward aspect of weight loss. We kind of just need to do something. We don't need to do too much. 3 or 4 times a week is plenty when it comes to sprints and resistance training. The rest of it is going to be supported through nutrition and lifestyle. So let's jump into don't number 2, and that is don't starve yourself. If you are going to do a diet that is 1,000 or 1,200 calories a day, it's probably not gonna end particularly well for you when it comes to weight loss. I'm not talking about short term because no shit, if you don't eat much food, you're gonna lose weight. I'm talking about long term because at the end of the day, we're gonna be on this planet for a while and it's no good losing weight for a month if the next 20 years you're just gonna go put it back on. All you end up doing with these silly starvation sort of diets is wasting willpower. It takes a lot of willpower to stick to them and be in that hungry state. And ultimately all we end up doing is losing muscle mass and reducing our metabolic rate, which goes against the points that were mentioned in the training, the things that we're trying to maintain to make being leaner last longer. Instead, I would just opt for a comfortable kind of 300 to 500 calorie daily deficit. This is much more manageable, especially for a longer term process without having a lot of those excess negative side effects that you get from being very, very deep in a caloric deficit. In terms of how this looks from person to person, it's gonna vary depending on you, your activity levels, your current body composition, and your genetics, but ultimately, there's a couple of things that I would recommend. Number one is don't be afraid of protein. Protein is definitely your friend in this instance. Again, it supports that lean muscle mass preservation. It's gonna help us recover from the training, but also protein's very satiating. Try overeating on steak, for example. It's actually pretty hard to do. If you find that you start craving sweet things and all this sort of stuff, upping your protein intake can actually reduce a lot of these cravings even when in a cut and help you feel satiated despite the fact that you're on lower calories. Something around the 1.6 to 1.8 grams per kilo of body weight per day is a good place to start with. A lot of the data suggests that you can be, and I think this works well, especially if you're a trained individual. I actually personally prefer a little bit more protein in a cut, but again, that's down to personal preference. Protein is great, but there's just one aspect. The other aspect I want to mention is to also not be afraid of including fats into your diet. It's probably one of the most common things that people remove when they're trying to lose some weight, and ultimately, fats are a very good thing for you to have. Adding in good fats is not only good for your health in general, they're the foundational building blocks to many different things, including hormones like steroid hormones like testosterone, growth hormone, and other things, but adding in some fats will help improve your metabolic flexibility, and that is our ability to burn both carbohydrates and burn fat, which ultimately, if you're metabolically healthy, you will have some metabolic flexibility. But be careful, you can obviously overdo fats quite easily. I would personally recommend sticking to fats that are incorporated as part of your meat. So think about salmon, maybe some fattier cuts of beef or chicken thighs, for example. That way we're not just adding on spoonfuls of butter and avocado and all these other things on top. The ratios are a little bit more in natural measures. All right, that's about as much detail as I can put into the nutrition without offending a bunch of people with various different dietary preferences, because ultimately there's a lot of different ways you can go here. I'm gonna leave that one down to you. I'm not gonna get involved. Let's move on to don't number 3, and that is don't ignore hormones. This kind of links into the diet thing as I talked about. Good fats, good protein supports hormones, as well as good and proper exercise at the appropriate times and volume. So ultimately, if you're adhering to don'ts number 1 and 2, you're probably gonna be okay here. But essentially, hormones have a massive impact on your metabolic rate, your flexibility, your ability to burn fat, and just generally have robust health. But insulin is a good place to start. It's often known as the storage hormone, especially when we have excess calories that is likely going to be stored through insulin as fat. So this is often why I'll lean towards lower carb options as a form of dieting caloric restriction, simply because it does help take care of this insulin element. It does improve insulin sensitivity, which is important when it comes to getting leaner and also being more metabolically functional. But also it's easy. It's a very easy way to implement into your diet because you just take out the carb sources, you know? If you want to eat whatever meal it is, you can usually just eat your normal meal and remove, say, the rice or the bread or the pasta or whatever it is else that's in that meal. Very, very simply without overthinking things too much, especially if you're looking to lose fat and not have to strictly count calories and all this sort of stuff, which I'm not a massive fan of. Obviously, the overall calories is what matters, and the ratios of how much carbs exactly to include is going to depend on the individual. So I'd recommend just trying it out. Go low, go a little bit higher, and see how you feel, see how your progress is. Don't number 4 is don't forget your environment. We're not living in an isolated instance. We're affected massively by our outside environment. You know, one of those factors being exercise. That's going to provide a stimulus and something for our bodies to change and adapt. There's many other things that we can think of in our environment that will also support that overall long-term goal of fat loss and improved body composition. One that I'm a massive fan of is cold thermogenesis, cold exposure, just getting cold. Something that modern living, we don't actually get cold particularly often unless we actually seek it out. Getting cold will not only burn through more calories just because your body has to heat itself up, but it also does improve your fat oxidation and your ability to burn fat as well at a cellular level. Now, there's many benefits to cold exposure, too many to put into just this segment of a video. So I'll link to some links down below to kind of give you some more information about it. But let's talk about application. That's what this video is about. Very simply, you can go for a walk outside if it's cold where you live and just wear a few less layers than you usually would. Go for a walk in a t-shirt for half an hour. You're gonna get cold, maybe to the point of shivering. That is still cold thermogenesis just as much as hopping in a cold shower or hopping in an ice bath, or like myself, going for a swim in a sea or a stream. All of these things all work, basically get cold somewhat often. Lastly, on the environmental factor here, I'm gonna mention briefly is circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm is our body's regulation to do with this day-night cycle. Ultimately is, again, a fundamental foundation of just long-term robust health. There's many bad side effects associated with poor circadian rhythm, one of which is a predictor of future weight loss. If you have poor circadian rhythm, you're gonna find it harder to lose weight. So ultimately, focusing on that is gonna be another key thing. You know, making sure you have consistent bed and wake times, trying to maybe get outside and see the sunrise like I've been doing lately, or just spending as much time outside with some natural light as possible. And then when you are inside, especially at nighttime, try to reduce the impact of artificial light. Try not to be staring at your phone right before bed. Try to put the lights down low, maybe even look into some blue blocking glasses. All of these things are gonna support your circadian rhythm, which will have a knock-on effect to many other functions that are gonna support, again, that overall goal of weight loss, but also long-term health. And it's definitely gonna support don't number 5, and that is don't ignore rest. And one of the main things I see when people start to lose weight in January is they just go to the gym 6 days a week and they're there for an hour and a half, and that's great. I'm really happy you've got the motivation to do that. But one, it's not sustainable, which ultimately is gonna be the worst thing for us, but also it's often not necessary. A lot of the research done around weight loss and some of the things I've included in this video, most people are only doing 3 or 4 times a week of actual training. We still need to have adequate rest, our body's ability to adapt to whatever stimulus it is that we're giving to it, and that includes the stimulus to lose body fat and lose weight. This is obviously gonna be supported mainly by sleep. Now, the amount of sleep is gonna vary from individual to individual, but usually 7.5 hours sleep is a good middle ground for most people. I would round it up to 8, so you have some latency when you go to sleep and when you wake up. Poorer sleep, which leads to bad choices. You're gonna be hungrier, you're gonna be less motivated to do some exercise when you have to do some exercise. Prioritize sleep is definitely a big one, and to be honest with you, it's quite an easy one to do. Most people enjoy sleep. Additionally, to improving your circadian rhythm and focusing on those things, you can also try using stuff like magnesium and vitamin D. Both of these support melatonin production, which can be useful when it comes to improving your sleep quality. Again, I've actually got a whole video on sleep, so I'll link that down below, along with a bunch of other resources and recommendations and everything else from today's video. Lastly, when it comes to not ignoring rest, let's just talk briefly about stress. Stress acutely is beneficial. That's things like exercise that we can get better from, but stress chronically is not good. Persistent stress leads to cortisol secretion, which leads to elevated blood sugar levels, the primary function of cortisol. Chronically, this produces inflammation, but it also skews with the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which will cause a bunch of knockdown effects later on the line. Stress management is a big one. Not doing too much exercise, feeding your body properly, fixing your circadian rhythm, all the previous points will feed into this last point of managing your stress. And ultimately, setting some time aside for you, doing some stretching, going for a walk, getting plenty of sleep, all of that sort of stuff is going to help. At the end of the day, don't stress too much about fat loss, getting fit, or everything at once. As I said at the beginning of this video, fitness is a lifelong pursuit. It is an investment that you make every single week, every single day of the rest of your life. It's not gonna be fixed in a month. It's probably not gonna be fixed in 6 months. It's probably not even gonna be fixed in a year. But don't worry, you have the rest of your life to figure this one out and make changes and make improvements. The most important thing is to start doing and to keep doing. But as always, I want to pass this one over to you guys. Do you have any recommendations? If you are already training, if you're doing something, I think it's part of our responsibility to help those who also want to get into a better physical state. You've been there, you've done it. You're doing the work. Help those around you also do that work. Do you have any recommendations for them? Leave a comment in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear your opinions on this, and obviously what I've given you here is not an exhaustive list by any means, so feel free to add whatever it is that you want to share. If you just enjoyed this video, if you found this video useful, hit that thumbs up button and support the channel. Right next to it is that subscribe button if you want to join the Bodyweight Warrior tribe. Don't miss out on any more future videos as we move into 2021. I want to support you with your training goals. But that's basically been it for this week, guys. I'll catch you in the next episode. Have a strong week and peace.